3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of inspirational people. So if you think about it, just starting off, when you go back to the beginning of our species 300,000 years ago, it really is amazing just how much we have overcome to be here today, living here right now. Just think about all the things that our ancestors have dealt with when it comes to climate change, war, pandemics, poverty, famines, and more. And yet, you and me are the descendants of those survivors. In fact, if you just lift up your hand right now and you look at your veins in your wrists, you can see coursing through those veins as you listen to this podcast, the blood of all your ancestors that managed to survive all these things for you to be alive today. In fact, if just one of your ancestors didn't survive, you wouldn't be here right now. So, when thinking about ancestry, I thought to begin this episode, it might be interesting to tell a story about one of my own ancestors who managed to overcome adversity in life, which then would allow for me to exist and tell you his story today. So you see, around 1620, my 8 times great-grandfather, so if I were to count out for you, it would be my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather named Thomas Plimpton was born into a life of poverty in a small village in England. And as a teenager, in order to create a better future for himself, he volunteered to become a servant to a wealthy man named Peter Noyer, in hopes that as a servant he would learn how to be a carpenter. And when he finished his contract of servitude, that his master, Peter Noyer, would eventually free him and he could earn money as a carpenter for a living. Therefore, the deal was that, as a servant, Thomas would serve Peter Noyer for a certain number of years so he could eventually be a free man. Unfortunately, though, this form of servitude was a common practice in England. So when you hear this type of contractual relationship today, this would seem really strange because no one does this today. This is really weird. But in those days, in the 17th century in England, this was unfortunately a common practice where people would volunteer to become servants, often very poor people, so that they could try to build a better life for themselves by providing cheap labor to rich masters in exchange for learning a skill or even being taken to the British colonies in North America to try to build a better life there. However, historically this was a risky deal to get involved in because typically a person would be under contract as a servant for at least 4 years, but if you did something to upset your master, that could be extended, and therefore you had situations where masters who were in these great positions to take advantage of their servants could potentially never free their servants. Thus, a servant who entered into a contract under his own free will could essentially be turned into a slave if he just happened to have a master that never wanted to actually free him. Additionally, this was not an easy life. It was very hard work, and you had little human rights, and as a result, many servants were never freed because they either died as a servant or because their contract would be extended again and again and again forever until they died because their masters really just thought of them as property. So Thomas's story would become complicated pretty fast. He's a servant, he's a teenager, and he's just trying to escape a life of poverty. And then in 1638, he would find out that his master has been organizing a group of family and friends to move to the British colony in North America called Massachusetts. Meanwhile, Thomas is still under contract to be a servant to Peter Noyer. And as a result, at the age of 18 in 1639, Thomas will find himself sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from England to Massachusetts to continue to be a servant under Peter Noyer. So one day you're sitting there in England thinking that your life is, just going to go through this process. I'm going to get out of this servitude contract and eventually become a free man, and I will have this new skill and I can, create a life for myself and start a family. Well, things have changed because now I'm going to have to go across the world to be a servant. And so for Thomas, this is what happened. And his life is already probably sucks. And he wakes up to find that he's going to have to leave his family and friends. Not knowing if he can trust his master, not knowing if he will ever be freed, and not to mention that it wasn't uncommon for people to die on these ships, either during the journey or soon after arrival due to diseases and the environmental conditions of the colonies in North America. So on April 12th, 1639, Thomas boarded a ship called the Jonathan, which was sailing from London to Boston, and it was organized by Peter Noyer. So at this point, Thomas's life could end badly at a very young age in many different ways, but instead, his life would turn out to be pretty miraculous, because Thomas would keep working as a servant to Peter Noyer, and he would eventually become a free man, and then he would go on to become one of the founders of a town called Sudbury, Massachusetts, and become a successful carpenter there, building several different buildings in town. Additionally, and ironically, Thomas would go on to marry, guess who, his master's daughter, Abigail Noyer, and have 7 kids, and then get land from his former master, Peter Noyer. So, to summarize this, Thomas's story really is a reminder that life is a journey and anything is possible. His story is also a reminder that the situations we are born into don't have to define us. And he is just one example of many throughout history, because throughout human history, people will have had to overcome many things, whether it's poverty, discrimination, disabilities, diseases, deadly situations, and more, to create the life that they wanted, the life that they knew they deserved. So if there's any lesson that we should take away from history, it is that whatever you do with your life, you don't have to settle for something that you don't want. You don't have to settle for the situations that you're born into or the things that happen to you that you cannot control. At the end of the day, your life is what you make of it, and this has been proven time and time again in history. There are countless people that you can look up to and see, this person overcame that. So for anyone listening around the world, know that the circumstances you face, and no matter how bad it may be, that you are not alone in history. And therefore you can overcome, because others have before you. Now, obviously, no one knows what it's like to be you, and no one will blame you for not being able to overcome those challenges in life, because you're the only person that is you. So it's really impossible for anyone to compare themselves to you, because they're not you, they'll never be you, and they can't imagine what's possibly like to be you. But one thing that is true is that no matter who you are or where you're from, you are the person that controls your story. You are the person that controls what the meaning of your life is, and that life will never be easy or simple, but at the end of the day, you have nothing to lose. So whatever it is that you want out of life, even if it changes as you learn more about what you want, you don't have to give up on it. Because the moment that you stop writing your story, it is kind of like selling your soul. As kids, we love to dream big. We are these innocent creatures that see the world in a very honest way, as a place for us to become anything we want to be. But for many of us, as we grow older and we go through the process of life, dealing with hardships and working at jobs we don't like, or having tragedies strike us in life, these things can start to chip away at our positivity towards these dreams that, we really believed in as kids. And over time, these dreams can slowly start to disappear. Now, if you already like where your life is going, that's great. And it's totally normal as well for your dreams to change and morph over time as you learn more about the world. But if you find yourself frustrated with your life, going to a job you don't like, or living in a place you don't like, or just living a life in general that you don't like, whatever it may be, don't forget that this is your story and no one else's. No one is going to write it for you, and every second of every day, your story is running out of time. The meaning of your existence is up to you, no one else. The things that happen to you that you cannot control don't have to define who you are and what you become. So as always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.